Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to News and Views on Salam Media. The time is 8:31 a.m. and we are going to be joined by Gideon Chitanga. He's a research associate at the African Center for the Study of the U.S. at Wits University. So the big question that we're going to be asking this morning is, before we ask the question, is that a major Washington think tank earlier this month released the details of a sophisticated simulation of a war pitting China against the United States and its allies over Taiwan. Some of the media coverage took comfort in what was at best a tentative conclusion that with the US's help, the Taiwanese government could successfully defend itself against an attempted armed takeover by Beijing. Uh, but in an uncanny bit of coincidental timing, Beijing has been busy lately in the wake of the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's recent Taiwan visit, trying to send the opposite message. It has done this by running its own war simulation. That, I believe, is a very, very worrying situation as far as the geopolitics is concerned in that part of the world. Let's not sit pretty here in the southern tip of Africa and think that if a war does break out in that part of the world, that it ain't going to affect us at all. There are going to be serious global repercussions. So, what are the type of discussions we ought to be having around this matter, and what is the likelihood that the war does in fact break out between the US and China over the island nation of Taiwan? Gideon Chitanga, a very good morning. Welcome to the program. And how do you respond to my opening statement?
Yes, good morning. It's an opening statement that very clearly states the complexities in the Indo-Pacific region, the deteriorating relations between the US and China, and the delicate situation that exists because of this relationship. The US and China are probably the two biggest powers whose relationship matters more than anything in the 21st century, because they are probably, as states, the most powerful countries in the current context. So their relationship is very important in addressing the current COVID and post-COVID situation that we are dealing with, addressing global economic growth, dealing with global security issues, and obviously ensuring that there is global peace, there is global security and stability. So there is probably a context, a historical context, I think, over Taiwan. China sees Taiwan as part of its territory, historically, culturally, and geographically. And it's a fact that in terms of the international relations dispensation, it's one sovereign China. The US has diplomatic relationship with one sovereign China. But the US also has informal relations with Taiwan. And I think the failure to determine a clear diplomatic position with respect to this historical problem is a challenge that will continue for a long time. It's a diplomatic challenge and it has its potential threats. China is looking at reunification or unification with Taiwan to create one the sovereign China politically as well as geographically and diplomatically. So in my view, I think the world does not need any other conflict. We have enough lessons from the First World War, from the Second World War to be able to avoid these huge conflicts that disrupt global stability and consequences. I think that there is a way in which international norms and values could be used to address the diplomatic scenarios like the one that we are talking about, instead of accumulating weapons and going into the military options. The UN Secretary General he said the past 2 weeks ago that mistrust, the violation of international norms, and the accumulation of nuclear weapons is actually increasing the risk of another third world war. To use his words, he said humanity is one mistake away from a nuclear conflict. And I think this could be avoided if these big powers responsibly stick to diplomatic, peaceful means, invoking international norms to addressing the current problems.
Gideon, I do know that you are obviously focused on the Center for the Study of the US. But let's just digress here a minute. You touched on nuclear weaponry and the nuclear threat. And that is really very, very serious. The world could come to an absolute standstill should that happen. We are seeing that possibly playing out between Russia and the Ukraine. Can we digress and focus on that matter for a minute or two? What would happen if we have a nuclear disaster in the Ukraine? Let's assume Russia decides to blow up the nuclear plant in the Ukraine. What would those repercussions look like? Not only for that region, but for the rest of the globe.
I think that the first key point is that the world is not prepared enough for any scenario of the use of a nuclear weapon, because I think we are in the mode where we are saying that we are rational enough to avoid these scenarios. But conflict can escalate, and there is a big debate about what is happening in Zaporizhia in Ukraine. I think the first part is obviously the massive, unpredictable size of loss of life, which can, and I mean direct loss of life from the nuclear explosions or the nuclear weapons, depending on what type would have been used. Then we have all the after effects of the use because of radiation contamination, and we, depending again on what the nature of the nuclear reaction or explosion, that can take whole geographic zones. Then beyond that, we go back to the economic issues, the geopolitical transformation, the after effects, the medical after effects in terms of diseases and other unpredictable conditions that are not known. So these are huge. If you look at it in a geographical sense, we are talking about a specific place. But if you look at the implosion in the aftermath of such scenarios, it's the global impact in an economic and political sense, and as usual, the consequences is unprecedented. You only get to come to terms and measure the scale of such consequences after the event.
There are theorists or theories out there suggesting that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombings in the 1940s has had lasting effects and impact all around the world. There is also the suggestions that the cancers and all of the dreaded diseases that we are seeing today, very especially all of the cancers, are a result of of those attacks way back in 1945. And I know you are not a scientist, neither am I, but those are the theories that are out there. And if any one of these countries decide to go the nuclear route, I guess it would really be the end of the world, would it not? And I don't want to sound like a dramatist here, but that is, in fact, the reality, isn't it?
you know, the problem, the big problem is modern science has made the conflict and wars extremely dangerous. And I think, but the worst part is the human mind is limited in terms of estimating certain things. And like you are saying, we talk of all these medical conditions that we struggle with, the pandemics and so on. And there's a lot of science about that. I'm not a scientist. But this is why the political leaders have such a huge responsibility. And for some of us, diplomacy is one of the biggest gifts in the 21st century, and there's a lot of lessons. So if we go to basic values that will keep dialogue flowing, it is quite helpful. And I believe from where I'm standing that the US and China have responsibilities to themselves as independent sovereign states, but they also bear a greater global international responsibility in the sense that they are big powers, and so they should at every time be obliged to work their relations within the norms and values of the international community, mutual respect, building trust and confidence, because they are key partners. And every social scientist or political scientist will tell you that their relationship is probably the most important thing, the political thing that is required in the 21st century. We learned from the Cold War, the relations between the Soviet Union and the US, when they polarized and eventually broke down. Before we knew it, we know the historical lessons that eventually happened in the sense of the Second World War and the ramifications. So I think these two powers should continue to find the ways of sustaining the dialogue, including on the most sensitive questions which they are dealing with.
Okay, I have one or two questions before I let you go, and that is, do you think that it was very short-sighted of Nancy Pelosi to have made that visit in the first place to Taiwan? Was there a bigger agenda behind her visit?
So from her personal perspective, it said that she is concerned with her legacy, and one day she's looking at retirement and coming out is having demonstrated that she's the biggest ally of Taiwan. But I think it was quite irresponsible. It was short-sighted. It was, to an extent, if it was a personal consideration, extremely selfish to reduce such a complex and difficult situation to handle it at a basis of your personal interest. I think it's quite, you see, the issues of national sovereignty and self-determination are the most difficult issues in international relations and diplomacy because they are barely divisible. So countries tend to stick to what they have in their identities in very strong ways. And considering the issues that the world is dealing with, considering how sensitive this matter is, I think Nancy Pelosi could have done better by just avoiding the visit. And I think the US at this moment should be exploring ways of deepening relations with China to address key problems: COVID, Ukraine, climate change, other security threats elsewhere. And these areas require dialogue and diplomacy and collaboration between these two big powers with other members of the global society.
My final question to you, I've kind of wondered long and hard about this. And you know what? It's a real possibility, Gideon. What if Donald Trump comes back into power and there are still these simmering tensions between the US and China? I mean, you're not quite sure. He's a very temperamental, very impulsive leader. Can one even begin to imagine what he would do under these type of circumstances?
Yeah, this is a difficult proposition, but I I think that, because we are only, I think I'm emphasizing what the US should do, because I am looking at how the visit by Nancy Pelosi sort of escalated the situation that we are in now. You see, I believe that China is not interested in conflict, and if there are peaceful ways, then surely China should be able to pursue peaceful means of dealing with problems, including the Taiwan question. I wonder, I think the US is also adequately equipped to address critical sensitive matters in diplomatic means, through diplomatic means, in spite of who the president is. So, and well, Trump was he was the president for a whole term, and in spite of the rhetoric, I think we can be able to pick some policy consistencies in spite of who the person at White House is. And hopefully, if Trump were to come back, he could rule the day in addressing sensitive problems, and in major conflict could be contained. We are already in a very worse situation, and big leaders should demonstrate that they are equal to the tasks they are facing at the moment.
Finally, Gideon Chitanga, have we asked all the right or wrong questions on the show this morning?
I think we are having a very important discussion, and you are actually raising questions that are ordinarily not raised in the media. And I think we are at a moment where geopolitical concerns should really be given a lot of space, and we should fairly digest these issues from every angle, because of the times and the moments that we are in. Our situation has never been as delicate as it is now. And it is when we have these discussions, we are talking to the key constituencies, but we also talk to the leaders in this way to say, emphasize that diplomacy is key, mutual respect is key, dialogue is key, because the issues at stake concerns everyone, including us here in South Africa.
Gideon Chitanga, Research Associate at the African Center for the Study of the US at Wits University. Thank you indeed for your insights on this very important matter. Till the next time, as always, stay safe and God bless.
Thank you.
8:49 exactly, news and views right here on Salam Media. Standing by to talk to us is Zaid Afzal from the PTI. We're going to be looking at what next for Imran Khan being charged, I think, with the issue around terrorism. So all of that and more coming up on the show. This is News and Views right here on Salam Media.